All right, hey everybody, this is Clarion, and today what we're going to do is we're going to migrate a shopping cart example from Redux into Context API. So we're gonna leverage the Context API and hooks. So the Context API that Redux also leverages, and we're going to create our own provider, and then we are going to be looking at promises and basically fetching from the shopping cart the data that they get from their JSON request and their API that they've created or they've simulated an API. We're going to see how we can go ahead and then migrate that information over to Context API. And the point is, it's just an examination of Redux, taking a look at state management and comparing and contrasting these hooks and how it works. And that's it. Just some, I just think some relevant and an interesting sort of examination because there's many refactorings going on of back and forth with Redux and context, and it really does depend on the context, pun intended, when to use and when not to use. And okay, the other thing before we start is just apologies because I don't have my fancy microphone. I'm on the road, so I'm just talking into the computer and lowered the volume of the mic, so hopefully the typing's not too loud. I try to be soft, and that's it. So let's get started. And what we're going to use for this example is we're going to go into the Redux Git, into the repository, the Git repository of Redux itself by just Googling, going to Redux. And then once you're there, we're going to clone it. So we're going to clone Redux. And then once we've cloned Redux, we are going to go into the examples. Click on examples. And then you're going to see the shopping cart example. So we're going to be migrating Redux shopping cart example to Context API of hooks. That's the gist of this video. So once you've cloned this project, then you can take this folder and you can put it somewhere, for whatever, wherever it needs to be. And then go into the folder in your terminal, and then you can go ahead and cd into shopping cart. I've already done this stuff, and then npm install, get all the packages that you need, the dependencies or yarn add or whatever you're using. And once that's all good, you can start the development server with npm start, and then you should get this. You should be getting on your browser the shopping cart example. So you can go ahead, pause the video here, and get all of that up and running. And I don't really want to get too deep into the command and using Node and that stuff. Hopefully you have that fundamental understanding moving forward with this, because there's a lot of stuff to cover. So pause, and once that's good, we'll continue. Okay, great. So now that we have that up and going, let's take a look at what's happening here. So the Redux shopping cart example is basically rendering for us. We see a shopping cart example, and then we have two sections. We have a products section and a cart. Okay, and then if you bring up your console in your Google Chrome, in your Chrome extensions here, you can see in the console that we also have this Redux Logger, and the Redux Logger is middleware that basically logs for us our previous state and our action in our next state, because Redux is a state management with like a Flux-like pattern, right? And we use Redux to manage our state when our apps get more complex, okay? But now with create context and leveraging the context API with our hooks and using the provider, as we're going to see in this example, there are more and more cases where maybe not necessarily Redux is what you need, and you can just instead use context. Depending on the context, again, pun intended. Okay, so bearing that in mind, so we have this nice Redux Logger middleware over here that keeps track of our state, and then we see our products in our cart and some buttons. So we see we've got some iPad, we have an iPad, H&M, this is stuff that we can get. So if we click on the H&M t-shirt, we notice that the amount decreases. Okay, so it's like this is like a store then essentially, and what Redux is saying is that this is it's your shopping cart and you only have 10 items as it's like to simulate a real shopping cart experience. He only has 6 items. And if we look here down in our logger, if we look at previous state on from the last time that we clicked, and we check products, and we go by IDs, we'll see our inventory, and this says 7 in the previous state in our inventory, the amount. And this is 6. So then if we scroll down to next state, and we go to products by ID, inventory 6, and we look at the second ID, right? Because this is ID 2, that's our second one, right? H&M. So that just shows you, the power of the logger, how this could be very useful. Just look at that for a second. And then you notice here that in our cart, as we click on these, the total increases. And we have a checkout button. We click it, and the checkout just basically clears. But it does not actually clear the products, which kind of also simulates that experience that, all right, even though this is just cleared the checkout, we're going to say that you still have made those purchases. We're just going to benefit of the doubt, kind of extend our imagination for this example. And that's it. All right, so it's just a nice, simple Redux cart, and that's all it really is. It's not so bad, right? So if we go ahead into the folder in our text editor, we can bring out the shopping cart folder example. Okay. So that's what I have here. I have shopping cart in my text editor. I've got Visual Studio here, and the source of that. And we're going to take a quick look at what's happening, right? Because we don't want to just go ahead and start going through everything. And I'm just going to take a brief overlook of Redux and how it's working. So you can skip ahead if you want, if you're already really familiar with Redux and you just want to just take a look at a few things with the context, go ahead and skip forward. And if not, if you want to just follow along on the logic here, because I think that it'll help just to explain the process of migrating. And I do think it's beneficial to do it. So what do we got? So in our source folder here, we go to the index.js, and we're going to see that we bring in the provider of Redux, which is taking the store. Okay, and so there's our provider taking the store, and it's basically wrapping the app, right? It's wrapping around our app. So that means that this is how we're able to get all of our state management into our application by wrapping this provider, and then through that we can use connect, which is a higher order component, which we use in our containers. If you go and look in like the products container here under containers, and we scroll down, we're going to see that when we do an export of our products container, we use connect, we leverage connect, which basically wraps around the products container and gives us map state to props. So we get access to the state and our dispatch for actions. And it's through the products container actually that we get our products, which are the products over here. And we're going to see, I know that can sound like, okay, well, how does that happen? Well, we're going to trace all of that. And then we're going to, after we trace all of it, then we're going to reconnect it into our context API with our use context provider. Using a provider context pattern, which is a little bit overkill for this example, but I think it will give you a nice template to think about for larger examples and applications. And to demonstrate this again for our products, if we just go here and we refresh, we see that the products load immediately, so it's mounting with our products right away. And yeah, so back in the index again, provider, we see a store. What is the store? It gets create store from Redux, which we import, and we also import our middleware. And the middleware is a spread operator taking all of our middleware, which is Thunk. And Thunk is basically, it's another middleware. So we have our create logger, it's our logger middleware, which we're pushing, okay, into our middleware. And then we're also using Thunk. And basically Thunk allows us to do custom async middleware action using Redux, which we do with this API, which we're also going to look at in a second. But essentially this, and then this thing here, this if conditional process envelope node envelope. So this is basically saying that if we're not in production mode, so if we're just developing, then use the create logger, push this into the middleware, which we need, right? But there's no reason we don't want our customers or client to see all the logging, so it's just for us, so that's just so that we can see it. And then for thunk, yes. So if you were to delete the thunk and then save, for example, we would get an error over here because when we're dispatching using Redux, our middleware, if we're not using something like thunk or saga correctly, then we're not going to be able to perform the async actions. And where are these async actions coming from? So now that we've looked at briefly at the index and we can see that basically Redux is wrapping around our entire application and creating with our actions and our reducers, which we're going to look at in a second as well. But essentially, it's just creating this state management for us in our applications. And if we click on API folder, on the API folder on our source, we're going to see that we have a shop.js and a products.json. The products.json is our products over here, as we can see. And these products reflect the 3 products over there. And if we were to, let's say, copy the third and change all this data over here of our JSON, like say ID4, title, a black tie, price $119, really nice tie, and let's say we have 15 of them. No, it's rare. We only have 2. So, and then of course we need to make sure that we have a comma. And okay, so if we save this, what do you think is going to happen? So let's save. Check the browser. And now if we look down, we can see that we have black tie. Okay, so yeah, so there it is. That is our data. And if we click add to cart, it works, right? So we have a nice dynamic running application, and that's great. And if we look at our shop.js under what is this? So the shop.js basically, it's importing the product, so it's importing the JSON, which is the JavaScript object notation. It's basically just the data that we have, which is very common for APIs that we use in order to get our data. We'll send it to JSON with React, and the export default here that we see has 2. We've got we've got this object with these 2 properties. We have get products and buy products. And get products has a timeout, and set timeout basically puts an interval that you can create a timeout interval for when you're running a function, and that will actually wait for the timeout to count down before proceeding. And the timeout here is a variable that's set to 100. So why don't we go ahead and set this to test this out to 2000, and it's 2000 because these aren't measured in milliseconds. So 2000 is basically 2 seconds, and then 100 would be like 0.1 seconds, right? So if we save this, what do you think is going to happen? So let's save it and then go to the browser. Okay, so if you noticed, the products, if we do it again, we don't see anything, and then 2 seconds go by, boom, and then the products show up. So that's what set timeout is doing here. So the reason why Redux has set up this API, they're basically creating a simulated API for if you were to be fetching it, so that they can kind of simulate this example and then use thunk and show you how the whole thing works. And that's what they're doing with that, I guess. And yeah, so it's just so we're tracing all of this now, so we're getting an idea of how the shopping cart is set up before we use the context API. And by doing this, we understand if we're going to be using our own hooks and creating our own provider, the best way to go about doing it, right? So then we looked at what else do we have in here? So we see actions, an actions folder. And so our actions in Redux basically take they're objects, and they take a type and a payload. And the type is our way of basically sending that information to our reducers, and then the payload is what we want to do, the action that we're performing. And we can see here that we're bringing in our actions the shop, and the shop is what had our set timeout, right, to get our JSON data from the products. And then we see here that we have constant receive products, and then we have an export constant get all products. Receive products it's taking a type of receive products and the payload of products. And then export constant get all products is a function which takes a dispatch function, so returns another function So it's a higher order function that sends to get the shop. So that's the shop from the shop, and it gets get products, which if you remember is get products, right? The property get products from shop. Then it grabs the products, these are our products, sends it through our dispatch, which goes to our thunk, and then receives our products so that it can be displayed. And so this is what we want, because what we're going to be doing in this example is we're going to be migrating this from our async middleware and using Redux to our provider context pattern instead. Okay, so that sounds a little bit theoretical and is a little bit like, okay, wait, what higher order function, what's going on with thunk middleware? I understand it could be a little bit confusing. Well, for sure, if you've never heard of any of that stuff, for sure. But we're going to see it, and we're going to do the process, and it should make more sense. And then, but for now, just to understand that in Redux we have a flex-like pattern. So we have actions and dispatching and with reducers. And our actions, though, it's different. It's not like flex in the sense where we're gonna be doing our dispatching here. Our dispatches are actually going to be happening. It's not going to be happening here. Here we have our object, which we can just think of it in terms of our type. Our types and our payloads, and then that is our objects, and then we have reducers, and we're going to look at those, and that's the functions that are going to be modifying the state. So for now we can look at that. That's fine. We're not going to go over all the other stuff because we're just this video is going to take way too long. So we have the API, then we have our components, and if we look at component item, for example, we're going to see that component item here takes product, has product and on add to cart clicked, okay? And product is actually being destructured is our products, which is the title, the price, and the inventory. And if we notice that these properties, if we look back at our products.json, title, price, and inventory. So that is coming from our JSON. And how is our product item getting it? Well, it's destructuring off of product. And where does that come from? Well, we go in our containers, and we look at products.container, and we're going to see the products container. And the products container, I think we discussed it already. We see we have the connect, which gets our product, and that product so we get that from our state, from our Redux, and then we pass that and we map it into the product item, and then that's over here, and we destructure off of our product, and that's how we receive the data. Cool. Okay, so hopefully that makes a bit more sense, and you're starting to see the connection now. And now that we're formulating how this is connected, we're going to be able to pretty easily go ahead and migrate it over. And then in our reducers, we can see we have a bunch of reducers, and if we click on products, we're going to see here that we have some helper functions, and then we have some reducer functions, and we're importing our combine reducers from Redux. And combine reducers we saw in the index.js, which essentially just combines our reducers, and we pass that into the store, and it'll combine them for us. So we don't have to bring in all of our reducers. We do it this way, and that way we can bring in our reducers into Redux. And then we're also importing our constants. So if you remember the receive products and add to cart, and the reason why they're coming from the constants action types is because if you look, there's another folder called constants, and all that really is we're just, instead of using strings, we're setting to these constant variables because it's good practice, and like that there's less of a chance of making mistakes. It's just more solidified, and that's used a lot. So it's usually just a constant folder. So that's that receive products. If you remember in our actions, we were using this action type to receive all of our products, and then if we look, when do we use it in our reducers? We can see when we're getting it by the ID. We use these switch statements, and we're saying when there's a received product, then we get the state, and then the action returns. There's a reducer here to get it by ID, a reducer function, and then we have a default, which just grabs it for products, for the product ID and action. We're not going to go into all this. I encourage you to go check it out on your own, but it's just to see how the system of Redux works. Okay, and that's it. That's really it. And basically like that, we have a sort of system that we could follow for managing our state. Okay, so all of that in mind, having gone through all of that, why don't we go ahead and finally start some coding? I know it's been a lot of talking, and but I think that now that we have kind of a solid idea of how this is mounting our data, we should be able to do this relatively quickly. So in our source, we're going to create a new folder, okay? And we're going to call this our providers. And we're going to do the provider context pattern. And this pattern is a little bit overkill for this example we're doing, but it's just going to be good practice to do it this way so you can see how we can use a pattern like this to continue. So when you're done the video, if you want to continue migrating, by all means, go ahead. And we're going to do a products, because that's what we're focusing on, .provider.js, okay? And in here, we're going to import React. And we're going to be leveraging the create context from React, okay? So create context is essentially what it implies. It's what we're going to be using to create. We have to create a context for our provider, and then when we send that information into our index, wrap the provider around, just like Redux wraps the provider, we wrap around our own provider, which will be the products provider, and we can create our own context of the skeletons of information that we want to be passing into it, and set up our state like that, and then pass that state into our components, keeping everything isolated and extensible. And so to do this, what we do is we'll create a constant, and we're going to call it our products context, and we set it to create context, okay, which takes an object, and then within our object we can pass whatever properties we want, and we can set them up as sort of these empty skeletons, so that define though what they do or what they are. So we want a products, and our products, remember, is an array, right? Because this is going to be grabbing all of our products, and it's going to be an array of data that we're going to grab. And so we're also going to want to import the shop, right? So we want to get shop from, where is it in our, I don't remember, API obviously, and API shop. That makes sense. Okay, so we're grabbing that, and then we might do a test. For now, that's fine. Okay, let's just do that, and then let's also now do a constant. And we're going to actually export this, so export constant, and this is going to be our default because we're going to make the products constant products provider, and we're going to set this is going to take children. It's going to be a function that takes our children. It's going to have an explicit return statement, which is going to be returning our products context dot provider, so we're going to send it into the provider, okay? And that takes a value of an object, and for now we'll leave it as an empty object, okay? We're going to close it, and then in here we pass our children, all right? And then we can export default products provider. All right, and we're also going to leverage our hooks. We're going to use our other hooks in order to do state. So we're going to have use state and use effect. And if you haven't worked with hooks, then you're in the right place because we're working with hooks. And, but you know, it's like, so hooks essentially, the use effect is leveraging our life cycles, so we can hook into our life cycles. And then set up, instead of, you know, with our class-based components and doing the lifecycle methods, we can basically do all of our life cycles with use effect, or mounting, unmounting, and updating. And our use state it's another hook for our state, essentially, use state, and we'll see how this works. So what we can do is, should I make a test? I don't know. Well, no, let's just say constant. So you do a constant, you take an array, and it's products, because that's going to be our state. You have to spell it correctly. And then set products is basically like set our state. So we generally we can take the two different pieces of information, and the second one should be the setting of the state. So if, let's say, and then we can make this equal, this should be setting up to our state, so equal to use state. our hook and as an empty array, right? Because its products is an empty array, and again, it's the same thing. We're getting the data from our browser of products, so it'll be initialized as nothing until we fetch it or we get it. Yeah, and then to go back to this again, so products and set products. If let's say we were starting this initializing our state with a counter, and we wanted to set our counter to something, then our use state would be setting it to a numerical value to initialize it, and instead of set products, when we want to change it later on in our set state, we would call this, I'll let you think about it, set counter. And that's just generally good practice. You know, if this was a color, it would be set color, and you could set this to an empty string or a color, you know. And yeah, that's just to show you. So going back to products, set products in an array. All right, so we can save this. We're also going to do a test. So we can just write test, and we can set test to an empty string. Okay, and constant test can be a string that says this is a test. Now in our value, we can actually pass our information over, so we can say products and test. Save that, and we can go into our index.js now. And in our index.js, what we can do is we can wrap our new provider, so our products provider that we've made around our application. And we're going to wrap it over the provider of Redux's provider. It doesn't really matter which way you would do it. But we're going to wrap it this way because, anyways, just to show you. And we're keeping the store provider because the idea is that we're kind of, as we're going to go and migrate piece by piece of the Redux shopping cart into the Context API, as we do this, the idea is that we don't want to completely destroy the entire store and setup. We want to go piece by piece and see how it works and see what functions and what doesn't function. So we leave them both in there. And we can import products provider from our providers. Okay. And we can go ahead and save. Check our browser. 1, 2. Okay, looks like everything's working. We can test. Everything's still working fine. All right, and so now let's go back again to the provider. Let's just take a look what we did. So basically, we've brought in our create context, our use state, our use effect, which we're not using yet, our shop, which we're not using. We created a context called a products context, which takes an empty array products and a test as a string. Then we're setting up our state, initializing our products to an empty array. We're not using the set products yet, so we're not setting the state. But we've created children, and then we set this up to our context, and the context is taking provider so we could wrap it around. I know it sounds like a lot, but then now that it's set up, we can actually see this in action. And why don't we go ahead and do that by going into our products container. And in our products container, we're going to bring in from React our hook, use context. So we can use our context API like this. And we're also going to bring in now our import, our context, so our provider context from our providers provider. Let's just double check that the products context. Yeah, okay, cool. And it's going to be, it's not a default, so it should be wrapped around. All right, and now what we should have access to is what we're going to rewrite. Well, first we're going to rewrite the function into an explicit return. So we do that by setting a return and then bringing in our curly brackets and then closing it. Okay, so everything should be working. And then now we can bring in our constant and we can destructure off of our provider context test by doing that, and we can say this, and we can grab it from our use context, so we're using it, and that would be the provider context. Okay, and then just to test this, what we can do is we can actually run a console.log of test. Let's go ahead and save. says that provider context is not exported from providers products.provider. I thought it was though, wasn't it? Export constant products context. Looks like it is to me. Import provider context. Use context, provider context. Provider context is not defined. Oh. Provider context is not defined. Why is it not defined? Constant test is they're using our. So we're getting this warning. This is that provider context is not defined, and I go back to my products provider. We can see products context here is defined, and we're having a thing. We're taking products. We're taking our test. It's passing our children. The products provider. And then we're bringing in the products provider here. Go into our products container. We take React products container. Oh. So I've called this provider context, but actually this should be called products context. I don't know why I didn't see that, but I've been traveling. It's been a long weekend. Okay, so we look again. Everything looks like it's working. And if we look down at our logger now, we're going to see this is a test. Okay, so that this is a test means it's working. If we go back to our products provider, we can say context API is connected, smiley face, and we can save this. And we go back and we look at our log. And boom, even before it loads, right, before we even get the products, we get the context API is connected because there's no set timeout. Very cool. So we're hooked up now. We're hooked up, and this is awesome. So why don't we go ahead now and look at how we can take the products and send it in through our context, like how we've been setting it up. And yeah, so there's two things that we can do, right? In order to do this, there's a cheating way, and then there's like the way that I'm going to show you. So I'll show you both ways. And what do I mean by cheating way? I just mean that just to show you a quick example versus something a little bit more extensive. So if we went to our products JSON here and we just copy the file, and we go to our providers, we can paste it in there. Okay. So what we could do theoretically now is we can go into import. Oh, yeah, no, that's good. And we can import our products. What is it called exactly? Products.json. Products.json, and it's not called anything. So why don't we just make this constant products data. Sorry, actually, let's do this. Products data equals, and we can export default products data, and we're going to rename this from JSON to JavaScript. Okay, and then in our products provider, we're going to import products underscore data from what is it called? Products.js. Okay. It's a little bit of a confusing name, but that's fine. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to actually take our products data and we're going to move our products data into our use state. Okay. And then we're going to go into our products container. And we're actually going to bring it in. So in our products container now, we're bringing in test, but we can also now destructure products. And if we remove the products that's being basically taken from our props from products here, and we save, we're going to get a weird thing. It's a very strange thing, and we have another error that says it was expected. Oh, it expected an object, but we gave it an array instead. What is this? So, well, you know what we could actually do. Or products data. Okay, so this should not be an array. That's a mistake. Okay, so that should not be an array. So I don't know. Anyway, because by setting up into an array like that, essentially it was getting confused as an object, but now it's loading, and you will notice that now, because we're initializing our state to the products data, but when we refresh, there's no longer this wait time, right? Because we're no longer grabbing it from the API. We're just grabbing the data directly now from this other data that we've created as JS. But what we want to do is really see how, that the whole point is to see how would we do it if it was coming from this async simulation. Because otherwise this is not really getting the full example of what we're doing, right? So what we're going to do instead then is we're going to remove products data. And we're going to set this back to an empty array. And now we're going to see that products is an empty array, because it just remains empty, right? Because we never actually bring in our products. But the context API is working as we saw before when we were bringing it in. We set up the products to the data, and it was working. So how do we go ahead and do that? Well, we can leverage the use effect to make this work. So what we can do here is we can bring in use effect, and use effect takes a function as its first parameter and an array, which we're going to set up so that it fires only one time. So that's what it'll default for just once if we set it to an empty array, and that's what we want. We don't want this to continually be firing, and we want this to be asynchronous. We're set up as an async, and then we're going to say constant response, and then we're going to await for a response. And we are going to wait for the response. If you remember, if we go back to our actions, not our action types, but our actions, in the index, you're going to see that we were going for shop get products, which was the property from our products, to get receive our products, and then that's how we were getting our products through our higher order function here using the dispatch, sending it into our received products. Okay, so we're going to sort of do something like that here, where we can say, now we're importing the shop, we can say shop.getProducts, and we can say products, and we can just grab the products. We can do that, and actually what we can do is we can console.log the products for now. And we can go ahead and then we want to set products to our response. Okay, and now you're going to notice that Visual Studio Code it's noticing in its pretest here that the await does not exactly it's not awaiting something of a promise in nature, because shop.getProducts, if we go back to shop.getProducts, we're going to see that all it really is a set timeout function, right? And so it's not promise-fied. It's just doing a set timeout. So if we go back to our provider and we save right now, like this, we're going to run into an error that products.map is not a function. Well, we're console logging products, but also our await is not really actually awaiting anything that can be awaitable, so to speak. So what we can do though is we can, if we want to continue maintaining the simulation that Redux has created in the shopping cart and stay true to the inherent structure of the app, we can go in our shop here, and then what we can do is in our set timeout, what we can do is we can basically turn the set timeout into a function or promise So we can just do that by declaring an anonymous function and then setting up a new promise and wrapping it around our timeout. So create a new promise. We can save that. We go back and all right. If we can remove the console log. Let's just save. And we're going to see now that, oh, what did I accidentally do here? I forgot to close it. Oops. Oh, yeah, sorry. So products. Oh no, what's going on? Everything's going crazy. Products there. There you go. Save this. Okay. So we see constant response await, and now you notice those dots are gone. So we've promisified the function with our set timeout by creating a new promise. And now we're getting the products, and if we look into we go back to our products container, if we go to our browser and we refresh now, we see products, and our products should now be actually coming from our products of our original API. The beauty now is that if we go back to our container, we can actually remove our products from our state. So we could actually remove the entire map state props over here, which means that we can actually set map state to props to null, and we can save. And we do that, and we'll see that we are still getting our products. So there you go. We've actually fully migrated our Redux products into our context API. All right, very, very cool. And we did this we go over it again. We destructured our products from use context, from our products context. So at least that we created that. And we did that by, in our provider, leveraging the use effect, which hooks into our lifecycle, creating an async await to grab the shop items, and setting up in our index.js our products provider, by leveraging our products provider and our context API. And that should kind of give you like a basic kind of idea to go ahead and do that. And with that, what you could do for your own exercise is you can go ahead and look at something else in this store to migrate from Redux. For example, we look at our containers. We have a cart container here, which takes products.